Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome into the podcast. Today, I'm really excited to talk about the topic of when the going gets tough. You know, it's all great and easy for us to kind of talk a big game about good parenting and what that is, what's the gold standard of parenting, all that great stuff. But how do we actually do it when the shit hits the fan? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I am going to tell you a little story about me and what happened for me when the shit hit the fan a few years ago to kind of get us going and then be my little confession for today. So a lot of people already know this. My oldest son, Elijah, who's about to graduate from high school and go off to college in the fall, we're so excited and proud of him and interested and curious about the next chapter, all that good stuff. When he started high school, his freshman year of high school, he really kind of went down the rabbit hole or through the looking glass, or I don't even know what analogy you want to use for what happened to Elijah, but he really, what I said for a long time was he really shit the bed. Like this kid went from being like a super well-behaved, pretty high performing in school, really just kind and loving and just a great all-around human. And all of a sudden he just fell into like real extreme depression. Then that descended into all the things that depression can descend into, all the things that parents are worried about with their kids. He was struggling with suicidal ideation, self-harm. He started using drugs. He became addicted to drugs. Then when you're an addict, even worse stuff happens, like lying and stealing. And OMG, it's really easy for me to kind of tell this like little, soundbite about it now, but I can promise you the shit had hit the fan for me personally in parenting. And I think it was almost even a double whammy for me because I'm a parent coach. So on top of, just as any parent would, being terrified and so upset and worried, and then also wondering, like, is this my fault? Did I do something wrong? I also had this feeling of almost like a professional identity crisis where I was like, am I even a good parent? And if I'm not, then what business do I have being a parent coach? Like, am I even like hurting families by teaching them these concepts that I teach every day? Like, it was a really dark time. And this is when I totally threw out the gold standard in parenting. I completely stopped doing all of the things that I taught my clients to do every day, that I was like writing my emails about, that I was, you know, constantly espousing to everybody. I couldn't do it. So, what do I mean by that? Okay. So, gold standard of parenting, authoritative parenting, you probably heard me talk about it before. Authoritative parenting means that we have two main factors in our parenting. Number one, we have a high degree of emotional connection and attunement with our child. And there's a million ways where we can think that we're doing that and not. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole today of like when you think you're attuned, but you're actually codependent. That's another topic for another podcast. But if we're doing authoritative parenting, we have a high degree of attunement, so like healthy emotional connection and attachment with our children. And the second ingredient in authoritative parenting is a high degree of control and leadership in our relationship with our child. And that shows up as, healthy boundaries, neutral, compassionate enforcement of those boundaries, etc. So we're nailing it in the gold standard of parenting. We are both disciplining our child in really healthy ways and maintaining emotional connection and attunement with them all at the same time. This is a tall order, okay? Most of us do not just naturally default parent authoritatively. I have yet to meet one person, including myself, who does that. But I will say that I know what it is. I know how to do it. I have spent all of Elijah's life, because he's my oldest kid, so learning how to do this. And I have been doing it since he was probably like 18 months old. And then he shit the bed, as I like to say. He was going through a really, really hard time. And none of the stuff that we normally were doing was helping him make better choices. He was not able to show up any better than what he was. And the more afraid I got, the more emotionally upset I got, the more shameful I felt, the more I was second guessing myself, the more self-doubt I felt. I started letting that authoritative parenting slip away and rationalizing it, right? Like if you have a kiddo who is struggling with suicidal ideation and self-harm, it is really understandable and normal for us to worry that holding a boundary with this kid could be the thing that puts him over the edge. Like, I don't want to say no about this thing that he really wants. Plus, I'm so emotionally in tune with him that I can see that he's been so sad, and all I desperately want is for him to just have one day where he's happy and I see a smile on his face. So all of a sudden I slipped completely out of authoritative parenting and into crazily permissive parenting, like to the point where even my husband, who of course was feeling all the same emotions I was saying, like, who are you? Like, what are you doing? I heard you tell him point blank that this or that was not going to happen, and then do it anyway. And I was like, it's like I didn't even recognize myself, because my default parenting, while it's not authoritative, it's also not permissive. Like if I don't watch myself when I'm not like on my A game in a normal situation, when things aren't super intense, my default parenting is much more authoritarian, which is kind of that like dictator, my way or the highway kind of parent. Also not good for kids. But my point is that, permissive parenting is really not in my wheelhouse normally. But this is such a great example of how once things get hard, when the going gets tough, all of a sudden, these skills that we're working on building, the stuff that we know is right for our kids, becomes more and more challenging to give them. But what I really want you to take away from today's podcast, so that's my kind of confession. What I really want you to take away from today's podcast is the gold standard never changes. What our kids need from us, even in these super intense situations, is never changing. It is always lots and lots of great, strong, healthy boundaries with really healthy enforcement of those boundaries, and lots of emotional attunement. There's never not those two things needed by our children. So if you're in this feeling of quagmire, if you're in the brain tornado, I talk about like with my clients, of all of the swirly whirly, like scary thoughts, those things are totally understandable. And it's our work to do whatever's our unfinished business so that we can actually show up and deliver to our kids. So that even though the gold standard never changes, it becomes harder to deliver that gold standard. And so that just means that we have more work to do. It doesn't mean that we stop giving it to our kids. So, it took a really long time for us to turn that situation around with Elijah. But one of the things that was really taught to us over and over again through experiences with him, through working with different professionals and everything, was like, that whole year where we were just scrambling and floundering with him before we realized, like, okay, we need to actually like up the ante here and do something a lot more intense to help him. That whole year of me like slipping back and walking my parenting back into this permissive hole, all that did was hurt him more. Like he really did need me to say, nice try, buddy, but this is the container we live in. And no matter how much we're hurting and how hard it is for both of us to accept that container, it is that container. Now, easier said than done. This is why I have a job. This is why therapists have jobs. This is why treatment centers have jobs. Like, this stuff is hard to do. The clients that I work with spend probably the first like 3 months working with me, just like kind of fighting with themselves and fighting with their brains, because this is a rewiring. It's a reparenting. It's a walking back and of really deep-seated patterns and old baggage, old experiences, all of that stuff, to be able to even assess a situation and say, oh, okay, I see. I get that it's really hard, that a boundary is needed here. I also get that it's really hard for me to hold a boundary. I even get why it's hard for me to hold a boundary. And I know that I need to give myself a little bit of TLC and do some of my own homework so that I can actually give that. Because not giving it isn't an option. Not doing right by my kid isn't an option. So if we get to that point where it's like, this is the gold standard, I know what my child needs. And also, this is the gold standard, meaning I refuse to accept anything less for myself than to do right by my child. Then we're in the situation of like, okay, so this is what my kid needs. I refuse to accept anything less than giving my kid what he needs. Now I need to figure out what I need to be able to give my kid what they need. And that's where someone like me comes in. So if you're in this situation where you're like, okay, great, yay, I know what the gold standard is, there's no absolute way that I can make myself do that. I can't make myself give this boundary. It's too scary. Or I can't make myself emotionally attuned to my child because I'm too dysregulated and triggered. You are not a horrible person. You are not alone. You are not strange. You are just a normal human who needs help, because we all do. So don't hesitate to, assess the situation and then give yourself what you need to be actually able to overcome and thrive and survive that situation. And that's where a discovery call with me comes in, or a call to a therapist, or, whatever that is. And if you know that you want to look into that, don't hold yourself back. Why would you? A discovery call with someone like me is free. Why would you not give yourself that hour to sit down with someone who has nothing but compassion and understanding for your situation? Give yourself over to them, share your story with them, tell them what you're struggling with. Let them hold that load and carry that weight for you just for that 1 hour, even. Give you a ton of great feedback. Of course, I'm telling you my experience. Not every coach is going to have the exact same discovery call set up as I do, but at least if you're meeting with me, that's my job, is to carry that load for you, at least for that 1 hour, and give you tons of validation, tons of real actionable feedback. It's no good for us to just spend the hour just me saying, yeah, okay, I'm sorry that you feel that way. That sucks. That's part of it. But then also it's like, okay, so here's what I see from my professional perspective. And also, by the way, I'm not in the trees with you, so I can see the forest. Here's what I see. What do you think about this? Here's a roadmap to better. Why would you deny that to yourself? So if you're out there struggling, please give yourself the leg up that you need to be able to actually deliver that gold standard to your children, because it is hard and it's not our default. I hope that's helpful for you today. And always wrap up with a question from a listener. So this was an anonymous listener who says, hello, everybody. I'm about to have my second child in a month. My daughter's 2.5 and is excited to be a big sister. I'd like any advice about how to address behavioral issues from the older sibling. Awesome. And this totally fits into the gold standard thing. Having a second kiddo, now we're in a harder situation, but the gold standard doesn't change. My biggest piece of advice to you, well, two big pieces of advice to you when you're transitioning to a new kiddo. The more you can stay on track with the consistent schedule that you have already, the better. And also consistency around rules and boundaries and how you enforce those rules. Because just because her behavior is probably going to change after new kiddo comes onto the scene, We understand why she's misbehaving. It's because she's in this crazy transition moment of her life. That makes sense. And the quicker that she sees, like, okay, the world still makes sense to me. What was against the rules before is still against the rules now. When I break a rule before, this is what happened, and that's exactly what happens now. The quicker that experience happens on her part, the quicker she will adjust to this new normal and things will start to flow. So that's advice number one. Advice number two is give yourself some grace, because it's going to be a little bit of a shit show for a while, and that's not a problem. You can always right that ship, but give yourself what you need to really have that like kind of afterglow, aftermath time after the birth. I hope that's helpful for you. If you have a question for me, send it in from my website, AnnCaplanParentCoach.com. I can't wait to answer your question in a future episode. Bye, everybody. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/KaplanCall, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.